Hey Kev, let's follow this trail over here. This looks like there might be something waiting down there.
All right. Hey, wait a minute. Do you hear that?
Yeah, I thought it was just me. What the heck is that?
I don't know what that is. Whoa, do you smell that too?
That's unbelievable. Hey, look.
What the?
Hey, look, those branches are moving over there.
What the heck is that?
Holy cow, is that what I think it is? Look at that thing.
Oh my God.
It's a freaking Sasquatch. Welcome to the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters podcast. I'm your host, W.J. Sheehan. Hello, everybody, and may I once again welcome you to what is going to be a spectacular podcast. My name is W.J. Sheehan, author of the series of books, Bigfoot, Terror in the Woods, Sightings and Encounters, all of which are available, volumes 1 through 8, at Amazon in ebook and paperback format, so please buy a bucket full. And if you're an audiophile, you could pick up volumes 1 through 6 at Audible, iTunes, and Amazon as well. So please partake of the offerings. And now, may I introduce my brother and co-host, KJ Sheehan. Kevin, how are you?
I'm good. How about you, Bill?
I'm doing marvelous. We're a third of the way or half the way through January by the time this podcast goes. And so far, so good.
How do you measure that? Not too cold, not too snowy?
My measurement is strictly on the snow meter. If there's no snow, it's great.
We're looking for some snow down here. It's always a treat, because we totally shut down when it snows. So.
Oh, yeah, everybody just collapses for a day.
Yeah, I mean, we like to say we do have a snow plow.
Yeah, the entire town has one plow.
The city of Raleigh has one snow plow, I think.
Yeah.
And
well, you know up here, Kev, everybody's expected to do everything they do every other day and on time, in spite of having to dig out of the snow and slipping and sliding and everything else.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
different down here.
Yeah. And up here, no go. So what do you have, my brother, in our cryptids in the news and other oddities segment for today?
Yes, we're going to go into some creepy, supernatural, perhaps evil legends.
What do you mean, perhaps evil?
It's definitely evil, but I didn't want to give the ending away. We haven't talked about this cryptid before.
All right.
So we're going to talk about the Wendigo.
Oh, yeah, that's a nasty little bugger.
You know this creature?
Well, I believe the Wendigo is a type of, is it Wendigo or Wendigo?
Wendigo.
Wendigo.
Yeah.
It's purported to be a type of shapeshifter, isn't it?
Yeah, it's typically described as a supernatural being.
Right.
And it comes from the spiritual traditions of the Algonquin First Nations people of North America.
Now, the Algonquins, Kev, they were up here in the Northeast, weren't they?
Northeast, yeah. Mostly around like Quebec and Western Ontario, but I think they came down into like Upper New York State, Vermont, etc. too.
Okay. Yeah, somehow in my vague history memory, I remember hearing something about the Algonquins.
Yeah, I think we learned about them when we were back in school in New York, because it's one of the familiar ones to me.
Yep, definitely.
Although I don't remember learning about the Wendigo.
No, they did not teach about the Wendigo in the Sachem School District, as I recall.
Even though it's named after a Native American chief.
Right. Well, they always tried to keep it kind of clean. You know what I mean? You didn't really get the nuts and bolts of what was going on when you were a kid, you know?
We didn't get the supernatural, cannibalistic, red-eyed beasts.
Now, tell me something, Kev. Would not it have been cool to insert such stuff into your teaching to draw in this young, active audience to something strange and bizarre, a little more interesting, you know?
I would have sat up a little straighter in my chair if we were talking about this.
Exactly. You know, this is what I'm getting at. You know?
Might not have been able to sleep either, depending on how old I was.
So what do you got, man? What's going on
so
with
these creatures, and by the way, a lot of what I'm talking about today came from a website called the Canadian Encyclopedia. I read a bunch of stuff, but they got some pretty cool stuff there and some images from some of the museums up in Canada that, of course, I'll post on my on our website, BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and these legends, it's typically humans that transform into these Wendigos because of their greed or because of their weakness. So it's kind of like they're susceptible because of greed, right? Or they're just generally weak and probably turning to the wrong thing for help, is my interpretation.
Wow. So they become the victim.
Exactly. And they then become very, very dangerous because these creatures are, they have a tremendous thirst for blood. And by the way, it's human blood. And they are very much rumored to be cannibalistic.
Nice combination.
Nice. I told you it was a little creepy. You know, and I said people are susceptible if they're corrupted by greed, you know, which is true of a lot of things today in our society, or weak. And some of the things that the First Nations people talk about contributing to weakness are extreme conditions, such as hunger or extreme cold.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say something, but let you continue for a minute. Now I'll finish it off.
Sure. And then, you know, it's interesting here, Bill, a little bit like, you know, evil demons or demons of sorts. Some of the legends say that the humans become susceptible to becoming a Wendigo when possessed by a prowling spirit during a moment of weakness.
You know, and really, that's the way it is, even in Christianity terminology.
Well, that's what I was thinking of as I was reading about this. Like, you know, who are the most susceptible to, you know, a demonic type thing?
Right.
You know, you're weak. You're wishing for, you know, anything to happen. You know, be careful when you wish for anything to happen.
Right.
You know, you may be turning to the wrong place for help. And then, of course, greed, power, corruption, you know, not a lot of good things can come out of that.
Yeah, it's amazing, too, that, you know, all of this stuff has been around as long as man has been on the earth. So apparently the Indians were experiencing such things themselves, and they had these beliefs relative to the Wendigo about what could happen to an individual that, you know, swayed from the right to the wrong, shall we say.
Exactly. Well put.
Wow.
Well put. Wow. So what do you think these things look like, you may ask? So a lot of different descriptions out there. But they're typically described as being kind of human-like, but very thin, with like the skeleton pushing through its skin. Yeah, ashen colored, and like a transparent like skin. Yeah, how's that for you?
Well, you know what it reminds me of right off the bat of those old creepy movie clips of Nosferatu.
Ah, good point.
Remember the early Dracula? He wasn't like the handsome Bela Lugosi guy.
No, well, you got to remember with Dracula, he's supposed to be 1,000 years old, so you're not looking too good after 1,000 years.
Unless you take your vitamins.
Well, they say like 700 years, Bill. That last 300 is tough.
Well, as they say in Great Britain, vitamins.
Vitamins. So according to some of the other legends and descriptions, it also has pointed ears, like kind of like a wolf ear. Yeah. And then some of the pictures you see of this, sketches and stuff, it has horns or like antlers coming from its head as well.
Yeah.
I have a picture of one on the wall here that my daughter gave me, and it does have antlers coming out of its head.
Yeah, you're painting the picture for me now, and it's coming back to me. I've seen this before, as you're describing it, and that is a nasty-looking vision. Oh, yeah.
And by the way, it does have red, glowing eyes.
Oh, of course. Why wouldn't it?
Well, just saying.
Oh, my goodness.
It's also described to have very strong strength and a very strong senses. So very, very skilled at stalking its victims as it comes up and wants to devour its victims.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now,
beautiful.
Did they believe this was a flesh and blood creature? I mean, it would have to be flesh and blood if it could devour somebody.
They talk about it both ways. Definitely flesh and blood, that it is cannibalistic. In everything I read about it, cannibalistic, it eats people. Mm-hmm. But they do talk about it like when people see it, that it's not leaving footprints and things like that. So it's kind of a combo. What would you call that, Bill?
What would I call it?
No, but I mean, it could be a demon taking the shape of this thing and then tearing people apart, right?
Yeah.
That could be.
Yeah, well, even in my own faith, there are entities that can take both good and bad. There are entities that can take on human form, where you could shake their hand and they're real. They've got clothes on. They can walk.
Exactly.
So this is nothing new,
Yep. No doubt about it.
That is creepy, man.
Super creepy creature, though. And again, I'll put some of the images up. So it's interesting. There's a couple of accounts. The first European written account of a Wendigo sighting was by a Jesuit missionary, right? So a man of the cloth named Paul Lejeune. And he lived with the Algonquin people in the early 17th century.
Okay.
Right? In and around what's now known as Quebec.
Okay.
So in eastern Canada. And in a report that he wrote to his superiors in the church in 1636, he wrote, "This devilish woman had eaten some Algonquin." And he says, "These are the tribes that live north of the river that is called Three Rivers." Huh. And that he would eat a great many more of them if he were not called elsewhere. Yeah. And, what's interesting here is that his report, going back to his superiors, right, show that he had a very strong belief in these supernatural creatures, just like the First Nations people, that he was living among. So had to have something that brought him to think of these other than just legend.
Well, yeah, and he's a Catholic friar,
right,
up there trying to convert First Nations people to Christianity.
Exactly.
And he's coming across this. What did he say? It was a woman?
At first, he describes it as a woman, and then as it's killing things, he talks about it as he.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously aware of people being eaten by this, at the very least, crazed person or being, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, at the very least.
Yeah.
And what's pretty interesting from a timing standpoint, so his report back to his superiors predates the Salem witch trials by about 60 years. So it wasn't like they were hearing about the witches and the witch trials, because it's pretty close by, right, in Quebec. And then they started to imagine this stuff. This stuff actually predates the Salem witch trials.
Yeah, and I don't know if during the Salem witch trials it was men of the cloth that were condemning these women. I think it was more townspeople and, quote, judges laying the boom down upon these women, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, no witches were harmed in this podcast. The witches are very active at writing letters to us, so we don't want to cause any trouble with them.
Yeah.
And then if you go out in the western frontier of what today is the U.S., the indigenous people out there and some of the employees of the Hudson Bay Company, right? You remember them, the early fur traders that would go out west and get the beaver pelts and stuff like that.
Right.
They would talk about indigenous people who were accused of becoming Wendigos.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this was where?
Out in the western plains of the U.S. Probably the western plains of Canada, too, so kind of up North Dakota and north of North Dakota up in Canada, Alberta, places like that.
Yeah, now we don't have great records of this phenomena, but that's where I remember hearing about it from, was out in the Plains states.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that's where I came up with this shapeshifter thing. But, it was, in fact, called a name. Lots of times when we talk about shapeshifter, they just use the term shapeshifter.
Yeah, well, there are a ton of names for Wendigo. And a lot of them I won't even attempt to pronounce. But
were any of them named WJ?
No WJs that I came across.
Ah, shucks.
Sorry. Sorry, you shapeshifter, you. And it's interesting. So the term Wendigo also, in closing here, it made its way into the early 20th century as a term that was used by psychiatrists to refer to a mental condition where patients felt possessed by another being and expressed cannibalistic desires.
And this was like a phenomena that...
Yeah, they'd call it Wendigo psychosis.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I never heard of it before.
They adopted it to describe. It's weird the way... There must have been a lot of activity around this for the, quote, medical community to adopt.
It's definitely not a pocket, of activity that we're only learning about now or something like that. This is legend that goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and of course the medical community back then was nothing, like we have now, I guess these folks were doing the best they could at the time with the knowledge they had and whatever, quote, medicines they had available. But
oh, yeah, we're still discovering better ways to treat all of these different types of illnesses, mental and otherwise.
Yeah, no, like me, I always found when I'm hungry, pizza does it. If I'm hungry, 3 or 4 slices, I'm good.
Yeah, my problem is after 3 or 4 slices, I'm still hungry.
That's when you turn into a Wendigo and start gnawing on your neighbor. Hey, I'm hungry, Bob. Sorry.
Watch out. So again, great stuff. Again, a lot of what I talked about came from an article in the Canadian Encyclopedia written by a gentleman named Steve Pitt. And he kind of put the whole picture together better than what I saw other places. So good stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Kev. And I've got something really interesting as well. Whoop. 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 When I get up, Johnny, run for your life. Come get some! Bang, bang. You're dead, sucker. The following story that I'm going to share with you tonight.
Hey, wait a minute, Bill. Did somebody sneak into your house?
Well, yeah. Machine Gun Kelly.
Oh. Didn't mean to interrupt you, but, there was some serious gunfire going on there.
Well, Kev, it's as I always say. Always carry more machine gun than you think you're going to need.
All right, well, get back to it then.
Now, this story that I'm going to read to you guys tonight is actually one that my brother and I did, I think, in episode 1 or 2 when we got the ball rolling with this podcast. And it's actually one of my favorites. And you know what my feelings are, that there's always new people coming in and we should be rehashing some things that really are at the forefront of this investigation of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the hairy man, whatever we want to call it. And let me grab this book here. Hold on. It's a little bit tricky for me. I'm sitting at the microphone and I'm actually grabbing a 125-year-old book to share this story with you tonight. Now, this came out of President Teddy Roosevelt's book, The Wilderness Hunter. The copy that I have in my possession here is from the late 1800s. And this story was more commonly known as the Bauman encounter. And I'm going to dive right into it, and then my brother and I will have at it in a discussion afterwards as to what exactly went on here and why this may have been in a soon-to-be president's book of his adventures hunting. I once listened to a goblin story which rather impressed me. It was told by a grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bauman, who was born and had passed all his life on the frontier. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of the tale. He was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghost and goblin lore, so that many fearsome superstitions may be latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps of the snow walkers, the specters, and the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths, and dog and waylay, the lowly wanderer, who after nightfall passes through the regions where they lurk. And it may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute, both at the time and still more in remembrance, weird and elfin traits to what was merely some abnormally wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was so or not, no man can say. When the event occurred, Bauman was still a young man and was trapping with a partner among the mountains dividing the forks of the Salmon from the head of the Wisdom River. Not having had much luck, he and his partner determined to go up into a particularly wild and lonely pass, through which ran a small stream said to contain many beaver. The pass had an evil reputation because the year before, a solitary hunter who had wandered into it was there slain, seemingly by a wild beast, the half-eaten remains being afterwards found by some mining prospectors who had passed his camp only the night before. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers, who were as adventurous and hardy as others of their kind. They took their two lean mountain ponies to the foot of the pass, where they left them in an open beaver meadow, the rocky timber-clad ground being from thence onwards impracticable for such horses. Then they struck out on foot through the vast gloomy forest, and in about 4 hours reached a little open glade where they concluded to camp, as signs of game were plenteous. There was still an hour or two of daylight left, and after building a brush lean-to and throwing down and opening their packs, they started upstream. The country was very dense and hard to travel through, as there was much down timber, although here and there the somber woodland was broken by small glades of mountain grass. At dusk they again reached camp. The glade in which it was pitched was not many yards wide, the tall, close-set pines and firs rising round it like a wall. On one side was a little stream, beyond which rose the steep mountain slopes, covered with the unbroken growth of the evergreen forest. They were surprised to find that during their short absence, something, apparently a bear, had visited the camp and had rummaged about among their things, scattering the contents of their packs and in sheer wantonness destroying their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores and lighting the fire. While Bauman was making ready supper, it being already dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along a game trail after leaving the camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by it a minute or two, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, "Bauman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs." Bauman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right, and upon again examining the tracks with a torch, they certainly did seem to be made by but 2 paws or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being, and coming to the conclusion that they could not be, the 2 men rolled up their blankets and went to sleep under the lean-to. At midnight, Bauman was awakened by some noise and sat up in his blankets. As he did so, his nostrils were struck by a strong wild beast odor, and he caught the loom of a great body in the darkness at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of the underwood as the thing, whatever it was, rushed off into the impenetrable blackness of the forest and the night. After this, the 2 men slept but little, sitting up by the rekindled fire, but they heard nothing more. In the morning, they started out to look at the few traps they had set the previous evening, and put out new ones. By an unspoken agreement, they kept together all day and returned to the camp towards evening. On nearing it, they saw, hardly to their astonishment, that the lean-to had been again torn down. The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and in a wanton malice had tossed about their camp kit and bedding and destroyed the shanty. The ground was marked up by its tracks, and on leaving the camp it had gone along the soft earth by the brook, where the footprints were as plain as if on snow, and after a careful scrutiny of the trail, it certainly did seem as if whatever the thing was had walked off on but 2 legs. The men, thoroughly uneasy, gathered a great heap of dead logs and kept up a roaring fire throughout the night, one or the other sitting on guard most of the time. At about midnight, the thing came down through the forest opposite across the brook and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a peculiarly sinister sound. Yet it did not venture near the fire. In the morning, the two trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they would shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing a good deal of game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary first to go along the line of their traps and gather them, and this they started out to do. All the morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving the camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they had passed. And now and then there were slight rustling noises among the small pines to one side of them. At noon, they were back within a couple of miles of camp. In the high, bright sunlight, their fears seemed absurd to the two armed men, accustomed as they were through long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness to face every kind of danger from man, brute, or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond in a wide ravine nearby. Bauman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to the camp to make ready the packs. On reaching the pond, Bauman found 3 beaver in the traps, one of which had been pulled loose and carried into a beaver house. He took several hours in securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homewards, he marked with some uneasiness how low the sun was getting. As he hurried towards camp under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed on him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and the slanting sun's rays striking through amongst the straight trunks made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the ghostly stillness, which, when there is no breeze, always broods over these somber, primeval forests. At last he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay, shouting as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though the thin blue smoke was still curling upwards. Near it lay the packs, wrapped and arranged. At first Bauman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so, his eye fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing towards it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but that the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in his throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log, with his face to the fire, and his back to the dense woods, to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking nearby in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps, and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with its forepaws, while it buried its teeth in his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gamboled around it in uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling over and over it, and had then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. Bauman, utterly unnerved, and believing that the creature with which he had to deal with was something either half human or half devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle and struck off at speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onwards through the night until far beyond the reach of pursuit. Kev, that is one of the most fantastic tales I think you'll ever read.
Yeah, no, and of course I've read it. And, to our audience, again, especially newcomers, Bill and I are about 600 miles apart when we record this podcast. And we have like a little bit of a rule or not a little bit of a rule, but a rule where generally I don't tell him what I'm going to talk about and he doesn't tell me what he's going to talk about. And it's kind of fun. And in this case, Bill, I had no idea what you were going to talk about. And you said we covered it before, but we did it in reverse. I don't know if you recall, but I covered it in Cryptids in the News and Other Oddities. So this is kind of cool that you did it as an account.
Yeah, and excuse me, I, as I'm prone to do, I have some favorite accounts. And I like to share them maybe like annually.
Yeah.
Just to bring them out of the closet and use them as a reference point. But, I said before, and I'll say it again, that Teddy Roosevelt actually became one of our presidents here in the United States. And prior to that, he was a rancher and a cowboy out in the Dakotas, South Dakota in particular. He had joined the Army. He became famous for riding with the, quote, Rough Riders up San Juan Hill in the Spanish-American War. He then became president when then President McKinley was assassinated. He took over the office. Ran for a second term, became president of the police commission in New York City with the idea of fighting corruption. And then he actually ran for a third term of president, I think in 1912. And while he was giving a speech, somebody shot him. And with the bullet still in him, he finished his speech, then saying it would take more than that to bring down a big bull. And later on, the party was formed called the, what they call that, Kev? The Bull Moose Party.
Yeah, and he was, I don't recall.
Yeah, he was defeated in that election. But this guy was a man's man, hunter, cowpoke, cowboy, and I said to Kevin when we first did this and discussed this, there is no way he includes this story in his book unless he fully believed it and believed what Bauman had told him.
Yeah, I mean, absolute great outdoorsman, war hero, and president. And, for those of you that haven't seen the book, The Wilderness Hunter, you can buy the modern version of it. It's hard to find a copy like my brother has. I have a modern version. My brother has one of the original versions, which I keep looking for them, but they're just too expensive. But it really is a book, kind of like an encyclopedia of all of the things that he discovered in the outdoors, whether it be the massive herds of buffalo out west and things like that. But it's, very much a nonfiction book. That's why I use the encyclopedia reference. So the fact that he has this account in there of these goblins, and talks about Bauman's account of them, how it gamboled around the dead body, like, holy cow. Like, yeah, it sounds like a horror story, but it's in a nonfiction book.
That's right. And the book I have, as I say, was written in the late 1800s. And if you think about some of the data, Kev, that he put forth in this reading relative to today's knowledge of the Bigfoot, how about it staying near the camp up on the hillside and letting out these howls?
Yes.
And the sneaking around and the breaking of branches, the snapping of twigs, or staying outside of the firelight.
Yeah, the stealthy behavior, right?
Right. And then the stench.
Yep.
The stench that he records, Bauman is saying that the thing smelled hideous. All of this really is a predecessor to what it is we now hear in latter-day investigations some 120, 140 years later. And we don't know. We know the book was written in the late 1800s. Roosevelt actually wrote 3 books. We don't know when Bauman's account was from.
Yeah, I remember when I covered it, I think they said it was at least 50 or 60 years, or 50 years, I want to say, before the book was published, that the account had happened.
So that's got to be, like
But they don't know for sure. Yeah.
Right. Let's just say 1820, 1830.
Yeah.
And, Roosevelt was then very instrumental in protecting the wildernesses and the national parks, what became the national parks in the United States. He had a great reverence and a belief that what he had lived in and what he had seen and what was out there really needed to be protected going into the future.
Oh,
and
no
thank
doubt
God he
about it.
did.
He had the vision.
That's right.
And folks, if you haven't been to some of these places where he walked into them, places like Yosemite, and was like, okay, this is otherworldly. Like, we can't let anything happen to this, even back then. Now, Today, when you walk into Yosemite, which I've camped there below Yosemite Falls, one of the most beautiful places on earth, period. Mm-hmm. But today, it's easy to walk in there and say, okay, we have to protect this. But back then, he was probably one of the few, non-First Nations people that walked in there and saw it, and he knew to protect it.
Yeah.
So, fought to protect it. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing, and to me, there are always men and women who rise to the forefront. Like, take W.J. Sheehan, who wrote all the Bigfoot books.
Look hundreds of years in the future, people are saying, always carry more gun than you think you're going to need.
Yeah, as they pull out their laser. Awesome.
I didn't know where you were going to go, Bill, but that is a fantastic account. And I love the fact that you broke out, that old version of the book that you have and read it right from it. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I love this old book, Kev, because the cover is off of it. I keep it on it, but it's detached. And the paper in the book is kind of, it was made this way. This didn't happen over time. I could tell that the paper is kind of rough at the edges.
Yeah, no, and it's got all those images in it, too.
Fantastic
stuff.
Plates of photographs and paintings in black and white.
Yeah.
Every so often. It's an incredible,
I think in that one
book.
image, I don't have the book handy here, so I haven't looked at it in a while. But that one image of all of the bison bones, right?
Yeah.
The pile, that's like a mountain. out west,
Yeah.
where he talks about the decimation of the bison. It's like,
Yeah.
I never saw a photograph like that until I opened up this book.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why the Indians had such a gripe with the white man.
Of course.
Because the Indians would lay hands on a bison when it was killed and thank God for the meat.
Yeah, and they would eat and use every bit of it.
Right, the horns and the skin and the fur, everything was a blessing to them. And they had a tremendous reverence and respect for the animal. Whereas the white man just came in and said, hey, ho, let's go, and started gunning them down and selling stuff, leaving them to rot on the plains, and just taking what they wanted,
Yeah, exactly.
So it was a crying shame, but the Bauman encounter, man.
Yeah, it's awesome. I didn't know where you were going to go. Fantastic. And I love the fact that we covered it kind of upside down this time around, even accidentally.
Yeah,
Very cool.
Again, if you choose to think that this was a story, then it would be kind of weird for President Roosevelt to have known all of these details of Bigfoot encounters, having never encountered one.
Yeah, not kind of weird, Bill. Just completely out of place. It doesn't make sense if he thought it was fake.
That's right. That's
and
right.
For him not to think it was fake, he would have had to have some other encounter, whether he wrote about it or not.
That's
obviously
correct.
He didn't write about it, as far as we know.
Yeah. No, that's correct. And who knows?
Awesome. Good stuff.
We can't talk to him, so we don't know what he may have actually seen.
No. Yeah.
So that's it, bro.
Great stuff, Bill.
What do you got in a bag of tricks as far as listener mail goes?
Yeah, we got some good listener mail. So the first letter that comes in comes from Rick. And Rick, his subject is Blue UFO Hawaii.
Okay.
So Rick's writing in about one of our episodes a few weeks ago where we talked about the current news event. I think it was December 28th was when the sighting was, but I'm going by memory here. That saw and videotaped the UFO or UFOs over Hawaii that night, which is pretty cool. And Rick writes in, I have a friend who is a high-level MUFON, which is Mutual UFO Network, official. So he has a strong interest in that subject. We talked about the Blue Hawaii UFO briefly a few days ago. He said there's a guy on Oahu, the island of Oahu, who flies a blue lighted parasail over the beach in the evenings. This sighting was nothing more than that, and if you look at the photos with this in mind, the filmed object has some of the same shape as a parasail and the same ribbing between several segments. Problem solved. Rick. So, Rick, I agree. When I look at the imagery, and before I saw your letter, when I looked at some of the frames of the imagery, which I have posted already to BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com, it looks a little bit like a lit-up blue parasail. But I don't know how it disappeared over the horizon into the ocean without somebody dying and never to fly again. And then don't forget that they saw a white one coming the other way. Off of the ocean. So it could be, and I appreciate your feedback 1,000%, but I'm not quite sold yet.
Yeah, and I went back and forth a little bit with Rick on this one via email.
Okay.
And I said the same thing. A parasailer isn't going to disappear out over the Pacific horizon off Oahu and appear to go down into the ocean unless he died.
Well, yeah, and it's not really a parasailer. I guess it's a paraglider where you have the motor on it. So you probably hear it, too.
Well, you definitely hear some whining. Those things have that, what's that engine called, a wankle?
I don't even know what they have.
Yeah, a lot of them use that little, it's like an opposing two-cylinder or something, Kev, with the big prop behind them.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like the for lack of a better description, like the Subaru Boxer motor or the Porsche Boxer engine.
Okay.
And, when they're running, they're making some noise. I don't know what you would hear on an island with surf on the shore and whatnot.
Yeah, fair enough. But I don't think he's flying around at 10,000 feet either at night over Oahu. I mean, Oahu, for those of you that haven't been there, it's like Manhattan of Hawaii. Like, it's a very populated island.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I have to bow out gracefully and just say...
No, it's cool. And we really appreciate the feedback, and I'm not dismissing it. I may sound like I'm dismissing it, Rick, but I'm like, I don't know. They saw the white one too, and the police were there, and if this guy's flying around Oahu, wouldn't you think the police would say, oh, that's that guy with the parasailer? I would think. But
like somebody would have come out after the posting, right?
Right.
Well, it's really neither here nor there. It's there for speculation.
But I do respect the MUFON folks. I mean, they're spending a good part of their time investigating these UFOs, right? So, good stuff.
Absolutely. No, we appreciate them.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
All right. So our next one comes from Fred. And Fred is talking about the Patterson-Gimlin episode that we did, again, a few weeks back.
Is this Fred Flintstone?
No, we don't give last names, Bill, even if their last name is Flintstone.
Okay.
And they work at the rock quarry for Mr. Slate and have a pet named Dino.
I love that
but
stuff.
Fred writes, hey guys, I love your show. I was just listening to your recent one, and you mentioned that they don't know what kind of camera Roger Patterson was using. He says they do. Below is a link to a paper written by Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who we have a lot of respect for, and he puts in parentheses, one of the few academics that will touch the subject, and William Munns. William is a makeup and costume expert. He worked on The Swamp Thing, Beastmaster, and Return of the Living Dead. Classics. And he writes, it is a great paper. William has also written an entire book breaking down how it could not be a costume. The book is called When Roger Met Patty. Keep up the awesome podcasts.
Yeah, that's really interesting,
It's awesome, yeah.
And so there you have this fellow named Munn, costume designer, makeup man, whatever he was, again, refuting. It's funny how people take up the guard and say, I'm going to defend this thing. These people don't know what they're talking about,
Yeah.
For every person or 10 that say, it's some jamoke in a suit, thank God there's people out there who are willing to say, you don't know what you're saying. This is not a man in a suit, and this is why.
Like, I don't know if you've seen the videos I put up yet, Bill, on BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com on this episode. I put up some cool videos. So if you haven't been there to check it out under the Patterson-Gimlin episode, it's some good stuff. Unedited interview with Gimlin. Some various folks that did some analysis of the imagery and stuff. Pretty cool. Whether you believe or not, take a look at the video.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. I mean, Kev, my feelings. Nobody's got to convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
I'll argue the point, to no end. That was a living creature, and it really doesn't matter to me what anyone else thinks.
Right. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, excellent.
Awesome. And our last letter, Bill, is a good one. It includes an encounter. It comes from Daniel from Washington State. And Daniel writes, Hola, mis amigos, Kevin and Bill. Hello, my fellow Creepfest friends. My name is Daniel, and I'm writing you from Washington State. First, I want to thank you for your wonderful podcast. I've been listening since the very beginning. And oh my, how the podcast has grown and improved. Thank you, Daniel. And we sure have. Boy, it's hard to listen to those early episodes. You're doing a great job, and I really appreciate y'all. I think he put y'all in there for me. Taking the time out of your busy lives to give all us listeners an escape from our everyday toil. And I always crack up when I hear Bill doing the English accents. Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, you do you?
I was going to say, you might have to give him a little Liverpool.
Yeah, how about a little bit of this, buddy boy?
And then he writes, by the way, Bill, if you need help in reaching a monthly quota on how many books you need to mail out how many books you need to mail out for the month. I will attach my address below.
Tightwad.
I'm like, Daniel, I don't even have an autographed copy yet. Come on. And
Jim,
he said,
you know what?
because I recently heard you saying that if you see something, say something, I want to tell you about an experience that I personally had in August of 2019. I've only told a few people, and this is the first and only time that I've experienced something that I would call otherworldly in my 42 years. I'm a landscaper by trade. This particular day, I was sitting in the passenger seat of our work truck, and a coworker driving and another coworker sitting in the back. We were in the area of Seattle, Washington that day, driving to our next job site. This was not downtown Seattle. We were a few miles outside the city, but still in Seattle proper. We were just getting off of I-5 freeway, exit 173 to be exact, going southbound. As we rounded the off-ramp, about 20 yards directly in front of us was a little clearing with some small trees and brush. It was a warm August day, and I had my window down. As we were slowing down to round a small corner on the off-ramp, that is when I saw the strangest thing that I have ever seen. It seemed to be moving to its left. It looked like a man that was wrapped in saran wrap and transparent at the same time as it was visible. It was exactly like the creature in the movie The Predator. Arnold. It did not seem to be any bigger than a regular human being. I was leaning back in the passenger seat as I saw this thing. I immediately sat up and shouted, "Oh my God, do you see that thing?" to my coworker that was driving. As I turned to look at him to see if he was looking, I turned back again to the figure, and it had either completely vanished or I'd lost sight of it, no matter how hard I looked. To write this out in an email does not do justice to the way that it had made me feel. It was a very quick encounter, but it was something that I will never forget. I have no idea of what it could have been. I assumed to think that it was either something out of this world or our military had some pretty amazing secret abilities. But why in the world would this thing be in the area of where I saw it? Afterwards, doing some searching, I have learned that many people have seen or experienced this phenomena. Many people are calling this thing the Glimmer Man. Many have seen this figure in the woods, and it has been associated with the big guy. I'm not sure of what I saw, but it has made a significant impact on my life. Like I said earlier, I've never seen anything paranormal or highly strange, or what I would consider otherworldly. But after seeing this Glimmer Man or Predator figure, I know that there are things in this universe that for the time being we just cannot comprehend. Again, I want to thank you for your great podcast. Using my name and info is fine with me. By the way, Bill, hablas español? And he writes that his wife is Hispanic and comes from Mexico, and that his father comes from Mexico as well, but he never learned Spanish until after he was married. And he also writes that I am also a Christian. I'm glad that you share your beliefs and convictions, so I will wish you a blessed day, and may the Lord Jesus Christ grant you the peace that surpasses all understanding. Thanks, guys. Daniel, and thank you, Daniel, especially for the blessing.
Amen. Yeah, and it's funny, Kev, because when he started talking about thanks for the Creep Fest, you know what I started thinking about?
What?
Do you remember when Eddie Munster entered the I Like Zombo Because contest?
Not until you mention it now.
Okay,
yeah.
And it was that creepy-looking guy on TV, and Eddie won a chance to be on his show. And when he got to the studio, he was like, "Where's Zombo?" And the guy was like, "I'm Zombo, kid. I just got to get made up. So, if you'll sit over there for a few minutes." He got so aggravated that Zombo wasn't real, he started tearing up the studio. Do you remember that?
I do.
Zombo's not real.
It's a classic.
It is classic. And speaking of classics, if you find yourself wandering around in the woods or encountering the Glimmer Man, remember just one thing. Always carry more gun than you think you're gonna need. Sleep tight. I gotta hit the stop button here. I had the book on my mouse pad. Stop.